What is up, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram? How is everyone doing? This your girl Jabri. I'm coming for my first week one wrap up video about my experience so far here in Kenya. So I got here Wednesday, so technically it hasn't been a week, but it feels like a week because so much has happened. So yeah, actually, I got here Wednesday afternoon. I met up with one of my friends, Benja. Shout out to Benja, who I actually met last year at GVI, Global Vision International, which is another international service organization. And I did some public health work in Shimoni, Kenya, which is a coastal village on the coast of Kenya, which is about 2 hours away from Tanzania by boat. And so throughout the year, him and I stayed in contact regularly, actually. And so I just was like, you know what, the first few days that I was going to be here, I wanted to spend time with friends and just really settle into being in the country. So yeah, I met up with Benja. Benja introduced me to his girlfriend, Fares, who is an amazing spirit. And so I stayed with them the first 4 5 days that I was here, and I was also introduced to another friend here in Kenya through my dear friend Queen Goddess Poet. Most of you probably know her. She's awesome, amazing person. She actually connected me to Wanjiku, who is a person here who is actually a performer, poet, artist here in Kenya. So we met up throughout the week and just had a great time these last few days, just settling in. I got 2 interviews done. I actually did one of my interviews. Okay, so let's back up. Rewind. So I have a project that I want to do while I'm in East Africa this summer. I want to be able to talk to community people from the various countries that I'm visiting and talk to them about their experiences with HIV/AIDS in their communities, how it's impacted them, how they feel about like Western medicine in terms of ARVs or any other things that just come down the pipeline from Western world in terms of how the Western world influenced HIV/AIDS practices here within the continent. So I was able to get 2 interviews this week. So the first interview was my dear friend Copa, who I actually met last year again through Global Vision International. He was actually the supervisor for the public health community health section of Global Vision International, and him and I sat for about 30 minutes really talking about the HIV virus here in Kenya, and he really gave me some great insight into it because he's been working within public health, community health since 2009. So he really is really connected to it. He's actually on his way going to Mexico within the next couple of weeks to do some more community health prevention work with through Global Vision International. Benja and I, after that interview, Benja and I, every morning we were out in the community going down to the slums and really asking community people did they want to be interviewed. And so we got one woman, her name was Stella Joan, and she sat with us for about 10 15 minutes and really was able to talk to her about her experience, and it was really good. A lot of times, a lot of themes that come up is the fact that a lot of people really like antiretroviral drug therapy here, and has really helped the country a lot in terms of controlling the HIV virus, in terms of decreasing new infections, prolonging the life of people who have an AIDS diagnosis, actually prolonging the life of people with an HIV diagnosis and preventing them from actually obtaining an AIDS diagnosis. So that's like amazing work. And one of the things that Copa talked about, and you'll see in the video, you guys check it out on YouTube. He talked about community strategies and how it was this strategy to train people from the community who had a very influential part in the community about health, about ways to destigmatize the virus, ways to engage people into HIV testing. And he said that that has worked immensely. And when he said it, I was like, oh, wow, I actually experienced that last year with Global Vision International because we worked closely with community health workers. And I actually had the privilege of training some community health workers about basic HIV/AIDS facts. And my friend Jasmine, shout out to Jasmine, was able to train them on tuberculosis facts. So that was really cool to see how that actually played out and to really be a part of it. So this week, and a lot of times I say it's been a busy week, a heavy week. Shout out to this tea. It's freezing in Kenya. Don't get it twisted. I'm here with a fleece sweater on and some hot tea. This is like my third cup today because it's freezing. It's actually winter here in Kenya. It's colder here in the city than it is on the coast. So yes, I'm freezing. So one of the things that came up over and over and over for me this past week were the feelings around this feeling like this other, right? So I would walk out into the village and it's like the world stopped. Like people will stop and be like, and just stare at me and stare at me, and like people will like break their necks to, and they're like walking this way but they're staring at me, and at first, I was like, oh, okay. So then I really sat down and talked to Benja and Fairez and asked them like, why are these people staring at me? And they're like, because they could tell that you're not from Kenya, and they can tell that you're not from Nairobi, not Kenya, Nairobi. So they said that you look like you're from Kenya, however you look wealthy. And here I am, I'm traveling in like what I consider like my dingy clothes or whatever, things that I don't have a problem getting messed up and dirty, and things like that. And I'm thinking I'm looking bummed out. And then these people look at me and they're like, wow, this woman is from the wealthy neighborhood. And so for me, that kind of I was taken aback by that, and then also like, and so I had to really check into my privilege as an American, and seeing like this gap in consciousness as far as me thinking like I'm in my bummed out clothes and then them thinking I'm actually wealthy in my bummed out clothes. So it really shows me that, I have access to things that other people don't have access to. And so that was one of the first things that really came to me in terms of an experience in humility. Another experience that I had within that same, being seen as wealthy and things like that is also one morning I was just chilling and I heard some of the neighbors talking. And one thing that they were talking about me, and I know that they were talking about me because they said the term Mzungu. So Mzungu is a Swahili word for foreigners. A lot of times it's said in relation to white foreigners, but it also is related to black foreigners too, or any foreigner that comes into the country. So that hurt me to hear. The first time that I heard Mzungu was last year when I was in Shimoni, and then now to hear it again. And so it's kind of like I started to have this dialogue with my friends about like, where do I belong? You know what I'm saying? As a black American, where do I belong? I left the country, the United States, where me as a black woman is not well liked, well received. Actually, let me include all of my intersections, or as many as I can think. A black woman, that's 2. Lesbian, masculine center, that's 3. I do not really identify as Christian, so that's 4. In terms, I am able-bodied, so I do have privilege there. I am educated, so I have privilege there. But in terms of race, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, is like none of those things are accepted within America. And it's kind of like I come home to experience racism and institutionalized racism and oppression, and then I come to East Africa where I'm like, oh wow, I'm going to be around my people, and then to not really fully be embraced and accepted but seen as this other, this outsider, so it's like, where do I belong in this world? If I don't belong within my own country, the United States, and then I want to escape and come to Africa, and like, where do I belong within Africa? So that really kind of like had me going in terms of my mind. It actually made me feel down a little bit while I was here within this first week, because it's like, where do I belong? And so for all the white people that tell us as black people, oh, y'all need to go back to Africa, child, where am I going? If I'm here in Kenya and Kenyans are like, you don't belong here, you're an outsider. So, I mean, that isn't to say that I wouldn't be welcomed here, but that is to say that I would be considered an outsider. I'm learning Kenyan culture, but I haven't been to other countries within the continent of Africa to know like what it means to live there and things like that. So it's like, where do I belong? And in terms of like identity, as well as like who you ask yourself as a Black American, is like, who am I? And this actually segments into another conversations that I've been having about preservation of culture. So in America, we always think about like, how are we preserving Black culture? In Harlem we have the Schomburg. Shout out to Harlem. Shout out to the Schomburg. But it's like, even with the Schomburg, there are many places in Harlem just walking around that is not preserved. And even if it is, it's only a plaque that's there. So it's like, how are we preserving Black history in terms of how far we've come in the United States? But then again, that's another conversation that I've been having here with Kenyans and Kenyans in terms of preserving Kenyan culture, because when we talk about neocolonialism and the impacts of colonialism decades, centuries ago, decades and centuries ago, we think about like, I see this infusion of Western culture into the Kenyan culture. For example, in the quote unquote hood section, or slums, or ghettos, or whatever you want to call it, here in Kenya, every other store is either a barbershop, a salon, or a pub, or a church. And doesn't that resemble how our hoods look like in the United States? Every other store is either a bodega, a salon, a barbershop, a liquor store, a church. So it's kind of like it's like this recreation of ghettos all around the world, and it's like, wow, And then also the role of the missionary, in terms of how it's shaping culture. So one thing, a conversation that I had was around like LGBT rights here in Kenya. So they do have anti-LGBT laws here, anti-sodomy laws here. So it is actually being LGBT is criminalized here in Kenya. And so I was having a lot of conversations about, how did this come about? Because we know pre-colonization times that the language wasn't there, but we still know that the actions of LGBT people were within the culture. It was a part of the culture. Many Kenyans who have not been brainwashed by neocolonialism will tell you that yes, it was accepted. So then in comes the missionaries who again preach the religious text, Bible, and it became criminalized. It was influenced to become criminalized to be LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And so now there's this reverting back to, oh, it is right, you guys shouldn't have LGBT people in Kenya should have LGBT rights. So it's kind of like this tug of war in terms of how Western society influenced things here in Kenya. And another conversation that I had is just interesting to me, is about, I like to call it female circumcision. I think that female genital mutilation is just, it's a term that to me is kind of is, I don't want to say ridiculous, but it's kind of like, it's a dramatic term to make it seem like what's happening is the end, is like, oh my god, it's the end of the world. And so we talked a lot about, my friend Benja is actually a Maasai, and so the Maasai culture, they do female circumcision as well as male circumcision. And so we began to talk about, why is female genital mutilation this bad thing? Female and male circumcision, the basis of it is to signify and mark manhood and womanhood. That is the bottom line, what it is, right? What it is for. And many other cultures, people have bar mitzvahs, in the Jewish culture. And I mean, for me as a black woman, I guess I became a woman when I had my first menarche, or first menstrual um, cycle. And so it's like, other countries, other cultures, excuse me, they have many different ways in how they mark manhood and womanhood. And this is just one way. The practice of it, the actually doing it, can be very dangerous, in terms of the if uh, the medical information isn't behind it, to make sure that women aren't bleeding out and dying. But the reason for it, in my opinion, is like, okay, this is a traditional cultural way in which people mark manhood and womanhood. However, because of the influence of the missionaries, it has been signified as this horrific thing against women's rights, is no longer giving women the right to choose. But yet, when we think about male circumcision, there's, to my knowledge, and you all can please inform me, there isn't a huge campaign from the United Nations, from Human Rights Watch, about male circumcision. And so it's like, I kind of look at it now, because there's no gender equity here in terms of men having the ability to choose to be circumcised and women have the ability to choose. I think it's now, in my opinion, from what it looks like, again, please include in this conversation, it looks like another way to control women's bodies. And I think women have, a lot of cultures here, they do now give women the ability to have agency over their bodies, to choose. However, it's like, who are we to tell, as Westerners, to tell another culture that their culture is wrong? We can inform them about the best practices and how to do it safely, so that they are not adding to the mortality rates and adding to disease rates and transmission of diseases like HIV and AIDS, or hepatitis C, which hepatitis C has now surpassed the mortality of hepatitis C has now surpassed the mortality of HIV/AIDS here in Kenya. So it's like, I I personally do not see female circumcision as wrong. And the reason why it bothers me that there's this huge campaign is that we are not doing a campaign to talk about male circumcision only because male circumcision was okayed within the Bible. So again, the role of missionaries within the influence. I personally believe that women should have agency over their body. They should have the ability to choose. And I think that that should be the campaign, as opposed to saying that this is wrong. It is not a wrong practice, in my opinion. I believe that women should have agency over their bodies to choose. So should men. I believe that as Western medicine, as Westerners, we should be able to have conversations with these communities about, okay, this is how we can sterilize the equipment to make sure that we are not transmitting viruses, we are not transmitting diseases. We can also talk about best practices in terms of cutting so that we can decrease the amount of bleeding out, so we can decrease again infection, so that we can decrease mortality due to bleeding out and improper medical practices. We can train people so that they can become local surgeons or doctors or things of that nature, so that those who we can train women, so that those who are within the circle, who are doing the ritual, are informed about what to do in case something happened, to protect the woman, to protect the girl who is now becoming a woman. Okay? And so yes, we do have to have the conversation about it's the cutting out of the clitoris, and the only reason for the clitoris is for sexual pleasure, and the fact that women should not have sex for pleasure, and that they should have sex for procreation and reproduction, and we get it. However, I cannot ignore that, and I think that that does play a part into why people think that female circumcision is wrong, because that is the difference between male circumcision, is that they're cutting off the foreskin of the male, but they're not necessarily reducing the amount of pleasure that the male has. So it's kind of like it's a way to sexually repress. And again, I'm thinking about some things because of a conversation that I had with a friend in terms of how sexual repression is actually adding to the HIV new infections here in Kenya. So women who are not able to express to their husbands that they want certain types of sexual practices done, how they want like couples don't have an open conversation about sex and sexual desires. And because of that, people, men and women, are more likely to step outside of their relationship and, are more likely to step outside of their relationship, have a side chick, and become comfortable with this side chick, and now that's how HIV and other STDs are being brought back into the relationship. And so it's kind of like this ongoing conversation about how to really best inform people about ways to reduce HIV and AIDS, ways to give women access to agency over their body. So it's like a whole bunch of conversations that I've had, and I'm just like blown away about the richness of just talking to people, getting on the ground. A lot of interviews weren't done on camera, but there was a lot of behind the scene conversations, and it actually has me thinking a lot. But pretty much that was a lot of things that I thought about this week. And oh, yes. So this is a topic that's a little bit TMI, but I think it's important to. Oh, it was a moth. My bad. So I think it's important to talk about. So, coming here, I want to talk about WASH. So WASH is a public health term that stands for water and sanitation and hygiene. So I want to talk about this in terms of menstrual health, because menstrual hygiene, because I had an experience with this as a woman who has a menstrual cycle. Coming here and living in what is Embakasi, which is a very, I would say, low socioeconomic status city within Nairobi County, and and not really having proper water like from like running faucets, not really having toilets that flush, and and having this menstrual cycle. So I was able to navigate it. Shout out to the military, shout out to the army for teaching me some skills, to be able to adapt to environment and still be clean and sanitary and things of that nature. However, just navigating it was difficult, to get clean water, to wash every day, multiple times a day, to clean and change and things like that. And so I bring that up to say that we are privileged in America, to be able to have access to sanitary napkins, access to tampons, access to the cup, access to sponges, access to all these different things, whereas women here in Kenya don't have that access, to be able to go to the bathroom, to adequately have soap and water to wash their hands. And me accessing my privilege by coming here with my own bar of soap, my own wipes, my own, well, I actually use the cup, so I have to, dump it out every once in a while, every 12 hours or so. So that was a very difficult thing. And so I started to ask some of the women, like, what do you do when you're on your menstrual cycle? And they're like, it's difficult, it's hard to, and they didn't know. They would use pads and they rack them up, throw them away. But the amount of times a day that they change is not a lot. So women are using sanitary napkins for hours upon hours because of the lack of access that they have to sanitary napkins. There are some women who are in a rural village who use dry dung, cow dung, and they dry it, they put it in like sticks and they might put it there, or they might use newspaper. And because there's not this access, many girls take off months from school, added up over a school year, take off months from school due to their menstruation. And so there's definitely a need. There are many things that are happening in terms of women and menstruation, child maternal health, and well, it does fall under child and maternal health. But there are many campaigns right now that are going on to provide access to girls, to sanitary napkins and things like that, because it's necessary. I was actually telling them, like, we were sitting around talking, girls, and I was saying, well, I use the cup, and they was like, what is that? And I was telling them, and I was like, oh my God, that's actually better. Where do I get that from? And so that, I would definitely like to, once I get back, start a campaign to really, or support a campaign that's already going on, in terms of providing access to menstrual hygiene products, So that was just something to really be able to navigate, not really having a proper shower with like shower head, hot water, things like that, running out of electricity, not being able to heat up water. And so it's very difficult, and I found myself in this constant conversation with myself about gratefulness and humility, and really praying on that consistently, and just thanking God for the humility. There are moments where I wanted to cry, like, wow, I don't know how I could survive this way um every day of my life, and so I just thank God, and just praying that, God continues to bless my friends here in Kenya, because they also have goals. They kept telling me, next time you come, you're going to be in a 2-bedroom apartment, and so I really hope that they are blessed in that way, in the desires of their heart, because they're amazing people. They don't have much, but they welcomed me in. We ate, we laughed, we had a great time. And so wrapping up this first week has really been an amazing week. And as I feed this into Coins for Humanity, Coins for Humanity is a startup nonprofit that I'm working on right now. It's an international volunteer organization that affords Black college and university students the opportunity to travel to sub-Saharan Africa to develop and implement HIV/AIDS projects within the region. And so I want students to have these types of experiences, to really be able to have these types of dialogues, to step outside of themselves. Research says, statistics says, data says that less than 4%, less than 5% of Black college students travel abroad, and less than 5% of students totally travel to Africa. So there are many resources that are needed here. And so a few things as I wrap up. I do have the campaign going on, to raise $10,000 to allow for 2 Black students to travel with me next summer to East Africa when I come back. But also follow me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Definitely put some dialogue up for some of the things that I said, and really engage in this conversation with me. And continue to support Coins for Humanity. Tomorrow I start my first day of volunteering with Nyambani. The link for Nyambani will be in the document section here, so you can check them out. Is just a real summary. It's the first and largest orphanage for individuals living with HIV and AIDS. So the first couple of days I'll be here at the actual home where all the youth here are HIV positive, but then I'll be traveling to Nyambani village, which is about 3 hours away from Nairobi, in a place called Kitui, Kenya, and I'll be working there. They developed this village because their parents have been wiped out. HIV positive parents are now deceased, so that now we have youth and we have grandparents. And so they built this village to reunite families together, to help people become sustainable. So they do their own agriculture, have their own entrepreneurship and microloans, and so it's a great organization that are doing some great work. So definitely check them out on the link. And so I'm excited about this new journey that I'm about to embark on. Once again, shout out to Benja, shout out to Perez for thank you for allowing me to stay this past week. Shout out to Copa for allowing me to interview. And I think that's about it. Talk to y'all later. Love y'all. Peace.